He stood there in the garden beside the wooden table, so pale, small, and thin that he looked like an ancient, consumptive, bespectacled child. The sun had gone down. There was no wind, no sound at all. From where he stood, he could see over a low fence into the next garden. And there was a woman walking down the garden with a flower basket on her arm. He watched her for a while without thinking about her at all. Then he turned to the box on the table and pressed a switch on its front. He put his left hand on the volume control and his right hand on the knob that moved a needle across a large central dial, like a wavelength dial of the radio. तो वो गार्डन में था, वुडन टेबल के बगल में. He had turned on the machine. ठीक है, सूरज डूब गया था. इट वॉज इवनिंग. आसपास कोई लोग नहीं है, कोई आवाज नहीं है, कुछ नहीं है. ठीक है, देयर वाज नो साउंड. ही कुड सी इनटू द नेबर्स गार्डन. वहां पे एक औरत थी. शी वाज कटिंग फ्लावर्स. उसके हाथ में एक फ्लावर बास्केट है. ठीक है, वो उसको कुछ देर से देख रहा था. ही वाज नॉट थिंकिंग अबाउट इट, बट देखते देखते मैंने एमनी चुपचाप देखे अच्छे, उसके बारे में सोच ही नहीं रहा था. वो लेफ्ट हैंड जो है वो वॉल्यूम कंट्रोल में रखा, राइट हैंड से वो डायल को पकड़ा कि जैसे रेडियो का होता है ना कि वेवलेंथ ऐसे एडजस्ट करता है, একটা কাঁটা থাকে, ঠিক আছে? তো সেটাকে ধরুন সেটা ঘোরাচ্ছে, হি ইজ টার্নিং ইট, টুইস্টিং ইট. The dial was marked with many numbers in a series of bands starting at 15,000 and going up to 1 million. And now he was bending forward over the machine. His head was cocked to one side in a tense, listening attitude. His right hand was beginning to turn the knob. The needle was traveling slowly across the dial, so slowly he could hardly see it move. And in the earphones, he could hear a faint, spasmodic crackling. Spasmodic. মানে spasms এক এক করে আসছে, ঠিক আছে? तो अभी वो मशीन के ऊपर बेंड कर रहा था, ठीक है? वो ऐसे करके एकदम बहुत कंसंट्रेशन के साथ सुन रहा था. एक हाथ जो है वो नॉब को ट्विस्ट कर रहा था. नीडल जो आहिस्ते 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 से करके बढ़ रहा था, ठीक है? ही कुड हियर अ फेंट स्पैस्मोडिक क्रैकलिंग, ऐसे करके हेडफोन्स में वो आवाज सुन पा रहा था. Behind this crackling sound, he could hear a distant humming tone, which was the noise of the machine itself. But that was all. As he listened, he became conscious of a curious sensation, a feeling that his ears were stretching out away from his head, that each ear was connected to his head by a thin, stiff wire like a tentacle, and that the wires were lengthening, that the ears were going up and down, up and up towards a secret and forbidden territory, a dangerous ultrasonic region where ears had never been before and had no right to. तो ये क्रैकलिंग साउंड के पीछे एक डिस्टेंट हमिंग आवाज सुना था, ऐसे करके आवाज आ रहा था, ठीक है? इट वाज अ साउंड ऑफ द मशीन इटसेल्फ. वो मशीन का ही वो आवाज था. एंड दैट वाज ऑल, ठीक है? As he was listening, उसको ऐसा लग रहा था कि उसका जो ईयर जो है, someone was stretching it and taking it towards a secret forbidden territory. ऐसा एरिया में लेके चला जा रहा है जहां पे human beings have never been before and they did not have the right to be there. इतना ही ज्यादा वो उसका एक क्यूरियस, एक स्ट्रेंज, एक सेंसेशन उसके कानों में आ रहा था, ठीक है? The needle crept slowly across the dial and suddenly he heard a shriek, a frightful, piercing shriek. And he jumped and dropped his hands. Catching hold of the edge of the table, he stared around him as if expecting to see the person who had shrieked. There was no one in sight except the woman in the garden next door. And it was certainly not she. She was bending down, cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. तो नीडल जो है आहिस्ता 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 करके मूव कर रहा था. अचानक से उसको जोर का एक हाई पिच्ड एक साउंड सुनाई दिया, ठीक है? वो तो हाथ ऐसे करके देखे, ऐसे ऐसे घूम रहे, देख रहे कहां पे क्या क्या आवाज आया कि नहीं आया. He expected कि कोई ना कोई तो चिल्लाया होगा. आसपास कोई नहीं है. There was no one. वहां पे सिर्फ एक औरत जो है, she was just cutting the roses. उसके अलावा और कोई कुछ नहीं था वहां पे. She bent down and cut the yellow roses and she put them in the basket. Again it came, a throatless, inhuman shriek, sharp and short, very clear and cold. The note itself possessed a minor metallic quality that he had never heard before. Klausner looked around him, searching instinctively for the source of the noise. The woman next door was the only living thing in sight. He saw her reach down, take a rose stem in the fingers of one hand, and snip the stem with a pair of scissors. Again, he heard the scream. फिर से वो दूसरी बार he heard the same inhuman shriek, throatless, loud, sharp shriek. ठीक है, जो नोट जो था, जो साउंड जो था, it possessed a metallic quality. ठीक है, and he had never heard such a shriek before. ऐसा साउंड उसने कभी नहीं सुना था. क्लासर आसपास देख रहा था, फिर से की सर्च कर रहा था कि कौन किसने ऐसे करके चिल्लाया होगा, नहीं होगा. ठीक है, only the next door woman was there. वो सिर्फ झुकी, रोज को हाथ से पकड़ी, कैंची से काटी. तीसरी बार वो आवाज सुना, वो देख रहा कि वो ऐसे झुक के काट रही है रोज को. एंड ही हर्ड द स्क्रीम फॉर द थर्ड टाइम. It came at the exact moment when the rose stem was cut. At this point, the woman straightened up, put the scissors in the basket with the roses, and turned to walk away. Mrs. Saunders, Klausner shouted, his voice shrill with excitement. Oh, Mrs. Saunders. So, roses काट लेने के बाद वो उठी, she put the clippers and the rose inside the basket and वो वहां से चली गई. क्लासनर चिल्ला, Mrs. Saunders, please wait. चिल्ला रहा है. इतना तक क्लियर है? क्लियर पक्का? जो लोग ऑनलाइन में हो, इतना तक क्लियर है आप लोगों को? त्रिशान, अक्षत? And looking around, the woman saw her neighbor standing on his lawn, a fantastic arm waving little person with a pair of earphones on his head, calling to her in a voice so high and loud that she became alarmed. Cut another one, please, cut another one quickly. She stood still, staring at him. Why, Mr. Klausner, she said, what's the matter? So, वो घूम के देखी, ठीक है, she saw a fantastic arm waving. Mrs. Saunders ऐसे करके हाथ दिखा के उसको बुला रहा है, हेडफोन कान में. इतना जोर से चिल्ला रहा that she became alarmed. तो क्लास में उसको बोला कि Mrs. Saunders, please cut another rose, please just cut one more rose. तो वो क्लास में से पूछी कि what's the matter, क्या बात है, क्यों, क्या बात है? Please do as I ask, he said, just cut one more rose. बोले कि please ma'am, Mrs. Klausner, sorry, Mrs. Saunders, please cut just one more rose. Mrs. Saunders had always believed her neighbor to be a rather peculiar person. Now it seemed that he had gone completely crazy. She wondered whether she should run into the house and fetch her husband. No, she thought, no, he's harmless. I'll just humor him. Certainly, Mr. Klausner, if you like, she said. She took her scissors from the basket, bent down and snipped another rose. तो मिसेस सॉन्डर्स जो थी, वो तो पहले ही सोचती थी कि her neighbor was a peculiar kind of a person, strange person. ठीक है, वो सोच रही थी कि वो घर जाके वहां पे अपने हस्बैंड को बुला के लेके आएगी. But she thought that no, ठीक है, he is harmless. I'll just humor him a bit. देखते हैं कि क्या करता. तो बोली कि fine, certainly Mr. Klausner. वो झुकी, कैची ली और एक रोज काट ली. Again, Klausner heard the frightful throatless shriek in the earphones. Again, it came at the exact moment the rose stem was cut. He took off the earphones and ran to the fence that separated the two gardens. All right, he said, that's enough. No more, please, no more. So Klausner जो है, फिर से he heard that frightful throatless shriek. ठीक है, ईयरफोन में फिर से वो सुना. ठीक है, एग्जैक्टली जब स्टेम काटा गया उसी वक्त वो आवाज सुना, ठीक है। वो अपना ईयरफोन रखा और भाग के ही वेंट टुवर्ड्स द फेंस। कि बस बस इनफ, दैट्स इट, प्लीज नो मोर, प्लीज नो मोर। The woman stood there, a yellow rose in one hand, clippers on the other, looking at him. I'm going to tell you something, Mrs. Saunders, he said. Something that you won't believe. He put his hand on top of the fence and peered at her intently through his thick spectacles. You have this evening cut a basket full of roses. You have with a sharp pair of scissors cut through the stems of living things. And each rose that you cut screamed in the most terrible way. Did you know that, Mrs. Saunders? So, like Mrs. Saunders, I'm going to tell you something. Hey, आप विश्वास नहीं करोगे, you will not believe it. बोला कि this evening you have cut roses and जितना बार आपने roses काटा है उतना बार ये roses जो है उतना ही जोर जोर से वो चीखा in the most terrible way it has screamed. आपको पता था क्या? Did you know that? तो मिसेस सॉन्डर्स बोलती है, नो, शी सेड, आई सर्टेनली डिड नॉट नो दैट। वो देखिए, नो, ये नहीं पता था। इट हैपेंस टू बी ट्रू, ही सेड। He was breathing rather rapidly, but he was trying to control his excitement. I heard them shrieking. Each time you cut one, I heard the cry of pain. A very high pitched sound, approximately 132,000 vibrations a second. You couldn't possibly have heard it yourself, but I heard it. तो बोलता है कि नो, इट्स ट्रू। वो बहुत ज्यादा एक्साइटेड था, वो जोर जोर से सांस ले रहा था। देखिए, नो नो नो, आई हर्ड इट। आपने सुना नहीं होगा, बट आई क्लियरली हर्ड इट। It was a cry of pain. It was a very high pitched sound, approximately 132,000 vibrations per second. आप सुन ही नहीं पाएंगे because human beings can only hear up till 15,000 vibrations per second. तो बोलता है कि आप सुनने नहीं होगा, but I certainly heard it. मैंने पक्का सुना। Did you really, Mr. Gloucester? She decided she would make a dash for the house in about 5 seconds. क्योंकि अच्छा, आपने सुना क्या? She's making up her mind कि जितना जल्दी हो सके यहाँ से भाग ले। अच्छा, चलिए कंटिन्यू करते हैं। You might say, he went on, that a rose bush has no nervous system to feel with, no throat to cry with. You'd be right, it hasn't. Not like ours anyway. But how do you know, Mrs. Saunders? And here he leaned far over the fence and spoke in a fierce whisper. How do you know that a rose bush doesn't feel as much pain when someone cuts its stem in two as you would feel if someone cut your wrists off with a garden shears? How do you know that? It's alive, isn't it? तो वो बोलता है कि यू माइट से दैट कि रोज बुश का तो कोई नर्वस सिस्टम नहीं है, उसका तो कोई मुंह नहीं है जो चीखे चिल्लाए, इट विल नॉट बी एबल टू क्राई, नॉट लाइक ह्यूमंस हैव। बट आपको कैसे पता? यू डोंट नो, you don't know if rose bushes feel the pain as we do. If you make a person stand in the ground and you cut off his wrists with garden shears, wo cheekhega. Similarly, the rose bush also screamed. How would you know that it cannot? Alive, right? Yes, Mr. Clausen. Oh, yes, and good night. Quickly, she turned and ran up the garden to her house. Clausen went back to the table. He put on the earphones and stood for a while listening. He could still hear the faint crackling sound and the humming noise of the machine, but nothing more. He bent down and took hold of a small white daisy growing on the lawn. He took it between the thumb and forefinger and slowly pulled it upward and sideways until the stem broke. देखिए, यस मिस्टर क्लाउसन, ये बोल के वहां से वो भाग गई। गुड नाइट, वहां से जितना जल्दी हो सके वो भाग गई। ठीक है, क्लाउसन वहीं पे ही रहा। वो वापस अपने टेबल में आया इन द गार्डन, फिर से हेडफोन उठा लिया। He stood there just listening, normally listening कि कोई दूसरा आवाज आ रहा है कि नहीं। He could just hear the faint crackling और humming sound आ रहा था, और कुछ नहीं आवाज आ रहा था। फिर जाके वो झुका, he bent down and एक डेजी को पकड़ लिया अपने हाथों में and he started to pull it. And जब तक वो उखड़ के पूरा हाथ पे नहीं आ गया, he kept on pulling. From the moment he started pulling to the moment when the stem broke, he heard. He distinctly heard the earphones, a faint high pitched cry, curiously inanimate. He took another daisy and did it again. Once more he heard the cry, but he wasn't so sure now that it expressed pain. No, it wasn't pain. It was surprise. Or was it? It didn't really express any of the feelings or emotions known to human being. तो जब से वो डेजी को पकड़ा था और जब तक उखाड़ ना लिया until unless he completely broke the stem free, ठीक है, तब तक he could distinctly hear a faint high pitched cry. वो आवाज सुन पा रहा था. फिर दूसरा डेजी पकड़ा, फिर से वो किया. He again heard the same sound. वो सोचा कि no, surely these plants are alive. Perhaps they express pain. वो सोचा था कि स्क्रीन, ये जो चीखना है, ये जरूर पेन का ही कुछ है, ठीक है, दर्द होने से जो आवाज करते हैं. देन वो सोचा कि नो, दिस इज नॉट पेन. प्लांट्स कैंट एक्सप्रेस द सेम फीलिंग्स और इमोशंस ह्यूमन बीइंग्स कैन. ये कुछ और ही आवाज. इट वाज जस्ट अ क्राई, अ न्यूट्रल स्टोनी क्राई, अ सिंगल इमोशनलेस नोट expressing nothing. It had been the same with the roses. He had been wrong in calling it a cry of pain. A flower probably didn't feel pain. It felt something else which we didn't know about. Something called tine or spur or pilankment or anything you like. तो वो गलत था. He was wrong to call it pain. Flowers could not feel pain. At least pain is a human emotion, right? तो plants तो human तो नहीं है. It's perhaps something entirely different. ठीक है, शायद उसको स्पर्ल बोलते या पिलाकमेंट बोलते या समथिंग. Call it anything you like. We don't know it. क्या आवाज है एक्चुअली. इतना तक क्लियर है सबको? इतना तक क्लियर है सबको जो लोग ऑनलाइन कर रहे हो? कीर्ति, अक्षत, त्रिशान, हार्दिक, शिवम.